Hello and welcome to everyone. We're delighted you're here to join us today for part 2 of our 2022 webinar series, Possibilities and Practicalities of Cloud Adoption in Life Sciences. My name is Pauline O'Riordan and I will be your host today for part 2 of our series, where we will talk about the importance of QMS, Quality Management Systems, and ISMS, Information Security Management Systems, in governing and controlling regulatory compliance of cloud technology. The life science industry is increasingly being drawn to the opportunities that cloud technology can bring. And in today's webinar, we're going to explore how robust QMS and ISMS systems can be utilized to provide evidence of good governance practices of cloud technology. We will also take a look at the implementation of such quality and security systems can potentially change some traditional ways of demonstrating compliance. So we have a fabulous panel of experts joining us today. I'll just introduce the panel quickly. Welcome to Mr. Fionnán Friel. Fionnán is Head of Business Solutions and co-founder at Odyssey VC. A warm welcome to Mr. Mark Healy, Head of Technology at Odyssey VC. Also joining us is Mr. Oisin Kern, CEO and co-founder of Odyssey VC. And our final introduction is Ms. Amrutha Prakash, QA Compliance and Regulatory Specialist. So welcome to you all and thanks for joining us. So I'm going to run through quickly the agenda for today. We're going to kick off proceedings with a presentation from Fionnán, who will speak to us about compliance in cloud technology, MS, processes and agreements. At the end of Fionnán's presentation, we'll have plenty of time for some Q&As. So I really would like everyone who's attending today, encourage you to put through your questions through the Q&A functionality, and we will put those to Fionnán at the end of his presentation. We will then be followed with a presentation from Mark, who will discuss delivering continuously compliant SaaS solutions for life sciences. And we'll also have an opportunity to put some direct questions to Mark at that time, before bringing in Oisin and Amrutha to join us on a panel discussion where we will follow up with everyone's questions as you put them through. So again, please do make sure you put your questions through to us. So. Right, I think we'll just kick off proceedings just while I introduce our first speaker for today, Mr. Fionnán Friel, and then Fionnán, maybe you can try and get your camera ready and your audio ready. We're going to pop up a quick poll. So you might see that pop up on your screen. When it does, it'd be great if you could just answer it for us. Thank you so much. Welcome, Fionnán. So I'm going to introduce Fionnán, excuse me. So Fionnán is Head of Business Solutions and co-founder at Odyssey VC. Fionnán has worked for over 2 decades as a computerized systems validation consultant in the life sciences industry. He has spent most of that time working as a lead consultant for a diverse range of projects, including leading full CSV lifecycle implementation on greenfield pharma and biopharma sites. He has extensive experience in assessing and auditing GXP system setups to ensure high levels of compliance. Thanks, Fionnán.
Thanks, Pauline, for the intro. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can certainly hear you perfectly here. Thanks, Fionnán.
Great. Then I might start sharing my screen, if that's okay. And
please do.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, that's perfect, Fionnán.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everybody. As Pauline said, my name is Fionnán Friel and I'm the Head of Business Solutions for Odyssey VC. And the topic of my discussion today is MS, or Management System Processes and Agreements. So we'll be covering looking at Quality Management System, QMS, and Information Management Systems, ISMS. Okay, so what's the concern? What are people really concerned about? It's to frame it in the way of a question, said we are a digital remote working and a move to the cloud technology. How do I have control on cloud? And what are the regulations that you consider? And how do I ensure I maintain compliance in the cloud? As everybody knows, we focus mainly on life science. So the discussion today is framed around for life science companies in the cloud, and for including SaaS or software as a service companies, or any as a service platform or infrastructure of a service who want to get into servicing the life science industry. So an outline agenda for today is: what is cloud technology? What are the concerns in using cloud technology? How does international standards help? How management systems can help you? How quality agreements help, and how do my concerns get mitigated with the management system? And we'll finish off with a conclusion to finish. So cloud technology, just what is it? It's the definition from NIST is that cloud technology is a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configured computing resources, e.g. network servers, storage, applications, and services that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. This cloud model is comprised of 3 service models. So software as a service, SaaS, platform as a service, PaaS, and infrastructure as a service. So each of those are layers that are kind of built on top of each other, with infrastructure as a service at the bottom, where you just get provision of infrastructure only. You don't get the operating systems that run on it. The next level above that is platform as a service, where you get the infrastructure plus the software and everything that goes with that to allow you to have a functioning infrastructure. And finally, software as a service includes all 3. So when you buy software as a service, you get infrastructure and you get platform. Everything's built in and managed by your vendor. Okay, so use of cloud technology in life science. So COVID-19 has created an opportunity to understand the urgency and significance that moving to the cloud can have on their business. Cloud technology enables business innovation through improvements in automation, scalability, resilience, and data analytics, or the availability of data to allow you to make those key business decisions. What does all that do? It allows for, or enables, easier clinical trials and data collection, research or analysis of huge amounts of data, development. It reduces time to the market and simplifies collaboration. And say an example for supply chain management, allows integrated, detailed tracking information. So you can have one system that can service the whole world or service you globally. Management systems, so they're integrated systems that can manage all quality processes. So if you're in the cloud, you can have your management systems that includes all the aspects and all the software that you need to run your quality management system. Okay, so concerns and challenges with it in the cloud, we all have them. If you're in life science, you're familiar or very comfortable with monolithic architectures, where I suppose historically your server was in your database inside in your building, and you could go down and see it. It was one or several servers that compromised the system, but it was very straightforward. It was in front of you and you could see it. When infrastructure moves into the cloud, there are new emerging concerns for you, either rightly or wrongly, around security. So our security processes and tools, are they fit for intended use when we move into the cloud? We know how, we're familiar and know how they work in-house. Can they do the same outside our house? Data availability, is information disseminated accurately? So can we trust what we see? And is the data being managed correctly? Is it comprehensive? And is it being managed in a timely manner, i.e. support and release management, application, resilience, reliability, etc., etc. Data security. So is access of data controlled, i.e. data, can we control and manage our data in line with any classifications of data we've done, or how we govern data when we have our data in-house? Is the accuracy and completeness of our customer data and processing methods safeguarded? In other words, is the data secure? Are we confident that the data will always be secure and that we can rely on the data? That's what's most important for us. And then lack of standards. So internationally recognized regulatory policies are slow to develop. We all know that. We've seen that even with, say, the latest CSA has still hasn't been formally officially released yet, because it's very difficult to get something exactly right, especially with the pace that technology is evolving right now. We can see that you might try and regulate for virtual cloud, and then before you have the standard release, containerization steps into the field, and then more and more, what are the new technologies that are going to prove very useful to the industry, but sometimes difficult to conceive and to wrap your head around how we're going to manage this from a compliance perspective. And then for the regulators, it's their problem. Is how do we regulate for all of this? So we know it's notoriously slow. So other concerns and challenges, again, vulnerability. How well are you or your vendors set up to manage the global threat of cybersecurity? I think we're all intensely aware of cybersecurity, both in our business and in our personal lives, constantly getting phishing emails, phone calls, texts. They're using every form of media out there now to attack us. And we've also seen that they have attacked our industry. They have attacked life science companies and held them to ransom by taking their data and saying you're not getting it back. We saw that they attacked the HSE here in Ireland and took a load of patient data as well. But thankfully they got it back. But nobody really knows what was involved in all of that. Data integrity. What is your strategy to maintain data integrity when you move into the cloud? So what is your process? Again, very often in life science, these are difficult things. We find sometimes difficult when it's fully contained in-house to ensure the integrity of our data. When we move to the cloud, that's adding a little bit more complexity to something that was already quite complex to manage. Security. So how do you keep sensitive information secure? Another concern for life science, especially when we have the regulations around what data can go where, for sensitive information, personal information, and also information that's critical to the company as well. And lastly, quality risks. How do you minimize the risks to patient safety and product quality? Remember that they are always at the two pillars of how we all do and should operate consistently, is making sure that no matter what we do, that the safety of the patient is always first, and that the quality of the product, which in turn relates to safety of patient, follows very closely behind. Okay, so how do international standards help? So there are international standards that help us to, once we meet them, once we guide them, then it gives those people who look at us from external and look into our business, they say, well, we already know we have a good starting point because this company or this supplier meets international standards. They're applied consistently or around the globe. So ISO 9001 put a fit for purpose quality management system in place. We talk about fit for purpose because one quality management system does not, it's not a one for all fit. Somebody who has a garage and is repairing vehicles can have ISO 9001, but it's very specific to his business. For companies such as ourselves, and for anybody that wants to service the life science industry, that fit for purpose should consider the customer, who is our life science, and that's the type of ISO 9001 certification we've gone after. The same is absolutely true for ISO 27001. Put a fit for purpose information security management system in place. Again, it has to meet the requirements of your customers or who you want to serve. And again, for us, that's life science. So we understand what are the requirements that we need to include in our ISMS. ISO 27017, it's around cloud security. Make sure you have those controls in place. It's part of the 27000 family also. And then ISO 31000, which manage risks at an organization in an efficient manner. So international standards help us to conceive and implement efficient and effective management systems that match our business need. That's kind of the key process here. Just because you have ISO 9001, it might not automatically make you acceptable or attractive to life science. The adoption of a management system is a strategic decision for an organization that can help improve overall performance and provide a sound basis for sustainable development initiatives. At Odyssey, we see them as essential for suppliers to have them in place to allow life science to work with them, and that's why we have one. That's why we have them. So how do management systems help? So if you're looking to service or provide products to life science industry, Then you need to build this into your QMS ISMS. These things, they don't happen magically or by accident, as we very well know. And very often, if you try to do this retrospectively, it can be difficult and you will miss opportunities. We've seen companies miss opportunities because their quality management system, or ISMS, wasn't fit for purpose for an industry they were targeting. They had one, but it wasn't a good fit. So increase the ability to consistently provide products and services that meet your customer and regulatory requirements is really that. Monitor. So address your risks and opportunities for improvement. So in other words, we talk about monitor and manage risks and opportunities for improvement. The voice of the customer is critical for us when we're working in life science. Don't go, people make the mistake of going out saying, here's exactly what you want. And very often in life science, there's a lot of additional requirements in there that companies haven't factored in. Again, so a QMS facilitates opportunities for you to enhance your customer satisfaction and the customer experience, as well as providing a very easy transition for them into using you through their supplier assessment process. If they see a QMS, then you're and it's built to kind of target life science, then it makes that whole process a lot easier. Security and control over processes. A QMS with approved processes, procedures, outputs, etc. That puts control on how you execute processes, including critical processes that are key for life science, such as infrastructure qualification and management, security and access, change and configuration management, training, etc., etc. Not only does it help you manage it, but it also should be the vessel to help you demonstrate that you do what you say you're going to do. And that's kind of like the last box I'm going to talk there, is the ability to demonstrate. So working within your defined QMS or IMS will give you that ability to demonstrate to customers, as it just says, that you do what you say you will do. And they need to see this approach, behavior, and a demonstrated output to allow them to comfortably work with you. The regulations allow and encourage outsourcing, we know that, but they do not allow you to outsource. They do not allow the regulated entity to outsource their responsibility. And now we'll come to that in the next slide. So how do quality agreements help? So quality agreements are not only a good business practice, but they're also a regulatory requirement. ICH guideline for pharmaceutical industry, ICH Q10 on pharmaceutical quality systems, says that the industry is ultimately responsible to ensure processes are in place to assure the control of outsourced activities and quality of purchased materials. It doesn't matter if you're buying syringes or if you're buying vials from somebody, or if you're getting services around the cloud. The same basic principle applies around outsourcing. The regulated company establishes the controls to support the quality obligations of their GXP requirements, and the cloud provider uses controls to support quality obligations and delivers a quality solution. In any contractual relationship for the provision and delivery of cloud-based services impacting GXP processes, ultimate accountability lies with the regulated company. That needs to be across very clearly now. You cannot stand up and say, oh, I need to talk to my cloud provider to see where that data is. You're responsible for your data, for the complete life cycle of the data, right up to destruction, from creation to destruction. With that said, it's necessary to have quality agreements in place with the cloud provider. And as we've just said, the regulated company establishes the quality obligations that go into that agreement, and the cloud provider agrees to fulfill these requirements by using controls to support the regulated company's quality obligations. They're responsible for delivering the a quality solution following the industry standards and good practices that are out there. We've seen them all. So how do these tie into our concerns from earlier? So if we look at, and I'm not going to speak too a whole lot, but you can see that supplier assessment is a very strong part of any quality management system. Again, we have those good processes such as change control mandated in 9001, incident management from 9001 and 27035. Vulnerability management is captured in 27001. data and asset management through 27001 and 9001, information security management again. ISO 27001 talks to security extensively. Risk management in ISO 31000 and 9001, and access control is both covered in 9001, 27001, and of course quality agreements themselves are detailed in ISO 9001. And just to be clear, we have audited suppliers both on behalf of our customers and for ourselves, and the instance of suppliers being found not fit for purpose to service the life sciences industry, it's more common than you might think. Sometimes it's fatal and ends the engagement, and other times there can be a range of work that needs to be put in place in order to make suppliers of goods and services fit for purpose. Having quality standards in place makes this generally a quality standard that targets life sciences. If that's what you're going after, or whatever business you're going after, it must be tied into their requirements, their regulatory requirements. Okay, and to finish up, in conclusion, management systems, an efficient management system integrated with applicable standards can effectively migrate cloud technology related issues. Additionally, certification from regulatory bodies through regular audits on the management system help maintain compliance to the applicable regulations that have been identified. Quality agreements are the main tool to establish the framework for work between the cloud provider and the regulated company. This allows both parties to acknowledge and accept their responsibilities in this relationship in order to accomplish quality objectives, which can be measured via agreed upon quality metrics and KPIs such as that. You can also include commitments to improve processes as you move forward in the relationship to allow for even greater trust and even greater confidence, and maybe even outsource further aspects of your quality obligations to your supplier if you find that right supplier. And from your audit, your supplier assessment, you should know how much you can trust the supplier and how much you can outsource to that supplier. GXP requirement accountability resides with the regulated company. This will never change for good reason. And companies need to recognize and acknowledge this. So you can outsource jobs, but your ultimate responsibility can never be outsourced. Cloud provider is responsible for delivering a quality solution following industry and best practice and good engineering practice to make sure that they're delivering the right system that falls in line with the quality agreement as agreed between them and the provider. That's it for me for today. I know it was quick, but hopefully it was to the point and it resonated with some of the people on the call today. Pauline, I'll hand back over to you now.
Thank you so much, Fionnán, and as always, thank you so much for your time. There's just a couple of questions in, Fionnán, so if it's okay with you, I'll put them directly to you. The first question that came through was, how does a QMS support me in the management of my cloud data? I suppose in the management of my cloud data.
Yeah, so as I said, your quality or your QMS should, for cloud, should define a process for how you conceive and you build a cloud offering. And if that should be one of the requirements that is factored in from the start and gets built into the system. Again, a good ISMS and QMS working together will help deliver qualified infrastructure, will deliver validated process flows of data within the system, which will in turn help you to trust the data integrity that the system is offering you, and the data, all the good things that go with that. So data availability and all those good Alcoa principles will be met within your infrastructure.
I guess they have all the checks in place as well, just to remind yourself of exactly what needs to be.
So that check. So, and the constant monitoring of your system. So your system is once you have the right system in place and it's tested, those good practices around user access control, change management, configuration management ensures that only the right properly trained people can access it, and who have done their training and who are allowed to access it and understand the system that they're working on, and the I suppose the importance of the data that's on there as well is what's important.
Great, thank you. And I'll put the second question to you, Fionnán. What do I do if I've just been provided a generic large quality agreement from my cloud provider?
Okay, generic quality agreements are what they are, and generally when they're given by your cloud provider, what they describe is what they currently have and what you're going to get. It's not necessarily focused on what you require and maybe specific aspects of what you require. So obviously, if you get one, you start off by reviewing it against some key requirements that you have. And if you find that they're not delivered there, like for example, one of the key ones that we see or we don't see in those generic agreements is notification of change. Just as an example, there's probably plenty more, but if you obviously want to be notified if there's any change to your offering, be it software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, you need to be notified of change. That's what's in the regulations, and that's what's clearly called out in the guidelines for any type of system. So that would be example. If you don't see those key requirements that you have in the agreement, well then it's required by you to go back and get that fixed somehow, or get that included in the agreement and make sure that it's fit for purpose for your industry. Else you're going to have potentially some difficult questions with the auditors down the line and may rightfully have a question to answer, you know.
And it's probably a good idea, I think you mentioned it before, maybe not in this call, but if you get a really big, large quality agreement, that you pull out the bits almost into a new document yourself, just to have it to be easily accessible. Yes,
and very, very, very often people get sent those, or they don't even, sometimes they don't get a quality agreement. They'll tell you that they'll point you towards a website where there are a location on the website where there are reams and reams and reams of whatever bit parts of agreements, or how the whole offering is structured, and you often can't find what you think you want in there, and it's a difficult thing to weed down to. So you need kind of to have ideally have specific quality agreements or service level agreements in place with you and your providers.
Perfect. Great, Fionnán. Thank you very much, as always, for participating in our webinar. And great insights and advice there. Thank you. Right, before I just invite Mark to the virtual floor, our next speaker, I'll take an opportunity just to run a second quick poll. So people should hopefully see that pop up on their screen shortly. As I introduce Mark, I might get you to start to share your screen and turn on your audio and your camera, please. So Mr. Mark Healy. Mark is Head of Technology at Odyssey VC. Mark has over 20 years experience in the IT industry, starting out as a software developer before moving to senior roles across software engineering and architecture. Along the way, Mark has held technical leadership positions in a broad range of organizations and sectors, from multinationals to IoT and blockchain startups. So welcome, Mark. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, Pauline. Hi, everyone. So for this next presentation, we're going to look at continuous compliance. And I guess it's probably worth saying that this is very much incremental and aspirational. We're not suggesting that you go out tomorrow and suddenly implement this, but there's a few best practices, current practices in IT, which we feel could be useful for enhancing and maybe streamlining the quality process. So if we talk about quality agreements in SaaS, there's three main areas. There's infrastructure quality, software quality, and service quality. We're going to focus on the second and third ones there. So software quality is really about the quality of the software as a whole, quality controls, the validation process, and so on. Service quality then is about how you deliver the IT services. And they map quite well to DevOps for software quality and ITIL for service quality. In the past, quality and indeed different functions within IT have been very isolated, very independent. A lot of manual coordination over and back, emails over and back, a lot of subject matter expertise across the different areas. And really, as part of this, we're trying to reduce the reliance on subject matter expertise and streamline communication and coordination across functions and make things work smoother, quicker, and faster. A lot of that's down to being kind of data driven as opposed to document based, but we'll get into that as we go through it. Really, when we talk about here is automation. It's moving from static documents to a data driven approach to quality, and doing that through automation and repeatability. So if you take the standard V model, what we're doing is we're doing more upfront work so that we do less work after the implementation. And the more work that we can repeat upfront, the more efficient it becomes over time. Like I said, it is very much an aspirational process. The approach here is to kind of iterate and incrementally look for quick wins and value adds, as opposed to trying to do a big bang implementation of this. If we go to ITIL first, so information technology infrastructure library doesn't really tell you much about it, but it's how you deliver IT services. It's a kind of a framework for best practice IT services. Very nicely aligns with 27001. You can see in the list there, there's corresponding sections in each. It's described as compatible with GAMP, which sounds nice, but what it actually means is that as part of ITIL, if you have ITIL and you have GXP GAMP, you're probably going to do two of everything. A lot of duplication of effort. You've got different processes for GXP and non-GXP systems, different data repositories for GXP and non-GXP systems. So they can work together, but you generally don't get any synergies by putting the two together. That's where compliant ITIL comes in. What we're trying to do with compliant ITIL is take ITIL practices and overlay them with the requirements for quality. Do it in a data-driven fashion. So instead of having static documents that describe a system, we have a database, data warehouse, whatever you want to call it, that gathers evidence about each system. As things happen, as events happen across the organization, they're captured. We can run workflows as opposed to executing stops. So if an event happens and you want to do something, you do that as part of a system controlled workflow. That means you don't have the same reliance on subject matter expertise. You're not asking or reading SOPs to understand how to do something. You're simply following a system-driven process. It is very much aspirational. It's not the kind of thing you're going to bring in overnight or even over 18 or 24 months. But there are quick wins you can do very, very early on to start demonstrating value and showing how you can drive efficiencies and free up time. So in a traditional sense, if a system changes, you've got a range of documents which may need to be uprevved. You've got risk registers and so on that may need to be reviewed. In this new compliant ITIL model, those changes are recorded once. They're recorded as part of data. Any documentation that you need is based on that data and created on demand. So you're not managing multiple versions of multiple documents for multiple systems. Because we have workflows as opposed to documents to describe how work is done, we have system controls in place. We instinctively know what the flow is going to be because the flow is dictated by the system. So there's a lot less scope for error, a lot less scope for non-conformances, and a lot less dependence on SMEs for procedure execution, which means that we can scale much better, we can do a lot more, and we can free up expertise, free up people's time to do more value add work and to more interesting and different types of jobs. DevOps is really about, the best way to describe it is automating everything that happens after somebody writes code. So ITIL is for service delivery. DevOps is for software development. So if you think about a traditional environment where developer writes some code, maybe it's a new feature for a product, you've got to refresh your non-production environments, deploy the code in there, run manual tests in there, make sure everything's okay, and then repeat that for each environment, whether it's development, test, validation, staging, pre-production, whatever it is, before eventually moving that to production. With DevOps, and particularly with CI/CD or continuous integration and continuous deployment, we have automation for all those steps. You write some code, it kicks off a process. That process automatically tests your code, builds environments to run the code in, and depending on how far you want to go with this process, you can actually deploy straight into production if all the tests pass. So what we have here in continuous integration is testing and validation, not in a quality sense, but testing and verification of your software to make sure your software performs as expected. If those tests pass, you go into the CD stage, which unfortunately has two different definitions. There's continuous delivery and continuous deployment. With continuous delivery, we get code ready to be deployed into production, but we don't actually change production. With continuous deployment, you can push code straight into production. Again, it's worth kind of remembering this is not a big bang exercise. You're not going to turn around tomorrow and start deploying code straight into production. So you can go as far or as fast or as slowly as you want with this process. But the idea behind DevOps is that you take out those manual repeated steps in every code change and every feature release, and you automate all of that. DevOps traces its history back to SRO in Facebook and SRE in Google, and the SRO slogan or motto, if you like, is engineer yourself out of a job. So if you see something that you do on a repeated basis, find a way to automate it and don't do it again. And that's very much the idea behind DevOps as well. With compliant DevOps, we expand that quite a bit. So a common problem in IT over the years has been misalignment of teams. So traditionally, you would have had a product team, a development team, and a test team. Product team asks for a feature A, development team builds feature B, test team builds feature C, and nobody can agree on what the actual outcome was meant to be. Test-driven development, or TDD, was designed to align software development and testing so that your product team will still say, I want feature A. Test and development will come to a shared understanding of what that feature is. They'll build what they think that, fingers crossed, it's what product looked for, but quite often it's not. Eventually that led us to BDD, or behavior-driven development. And behavior-driven development is based on the three amigos principle. You have a shared understanding across your product team, your development team, and your testing team. What that means is that we take user requirements and we write them out as BDD stories or BDD scenarios. These are plain English, human readable, fully understandable scenarios that describe what a feature needs to do or a requirement needs to do. They're then mapped directly to test cases, which are executed against the code automatically. So with the inclusion of BDD in any kind of development process, you can now map your user requirements to BDD stories, to test cases, to code, and your test execution can become the evidence for validation of your software. In other words, anyone, technical or non-technical, can look at those BDD stories and understand exactly what's going to be, what tests are going to be run, what the expected outcomes are going to be. So on the technical side, you use what I call step functions to map those scenarios, which are structured in a particular way with particular syntax, which can be picked up by a BDD engine that can run tests based on the scenarios that I'm overcomplicating this. It just aligns all these four things together. That's a critical part of compliant DevOps. What it means is that we don't, whether it's a technical person, product person, an external auditor, you can look at that same list of scenarios and get the same level of confidence that those scenarios cover the scope of all your requirements. You can trace them directly to requirements and say that these three scenarios encapsulate the scope of requirement 4, for example, requirement 7. So you know your requirements to be mapped by scenarios. You know the scenarios are executing tests against the code. You know that the code is being tested, and you know that there's evidence being collected at the end of those tests. So if you take your standard DevOps process, before that, as part of your development process, you're doing the BDD scenarios and you're mapping that out. Once you do the continuous integration piece, which is where we run these tests automatically, you now have a huge amount of evidence collected as part of the system. We can see every time code was changed, we can see who changed it, why they changed it, what comment they provided when they made the change. We can see every test that was executed, how long the test took, what the test outcome was, and so on and so on and so on. So by the simple introduction of BDD, you can not only test at a much more effective level, you can also do that repeatedly, do it consistently across every code change gets tested every time. And if that code passes all those tests, then it's ready for the CD stage, which we can package it up for deployment, or if you're feeling that way, you can actually deploy it straight into production if you want. So between these two concepts, compliant ITIL and compliant DevOps, we can actually take away a lot of the manual work that tends to happen in validation of SaaS solutions. It brings a lot more scalability because we can test more often, we can test in more detail. And again, it's all about front loading and automating repeated tasks as part of the process. If you look at these in isolation, if you look at DevOps and you look at GXP and GAMP in isolation, they seem completely different. I mean, DevOps is all about failing fast and iterating, low level of documentation. Developers tend to have freedom in terms of how they write code and how they implement tests and so on and so on. On GXP, it's all about performing as expected, functioning as expected. It's about quality, safety, making sure you're doing things the right way, making sure that everything functions as expected, it behaves consistently. So they seem to be at odds, but by combining them together in the right way and through the introduction of BDD and other elements within compliant DevOps, we can actually get the best of both worlds. So on the slide, on the diagram on the right, we can take all those green bubbles and we can apply those all as part of compliant DevOps and remove all of the downsides of either one. So we can implement change very safely, control it very well, and do it very quickly. We can greatly reduce the amount of manual intervention required. And because everything's controlled at a system level as opposed to a document or a human level, we have a much lower dependency on subject matter expertise, much smaller scope for any kind of any non-conformances, any kind of errors or omissions, and our evidence collection goes from being a point-in-time completion of a document to a continuous system-driven data collection, which allows us again to scale much quicker, identify issues much earlier, and really just take all of the benefits that initiatives like DevOps have brought to IT in the last 20 years and suddenly apply those to quality. I'm going to give you a pretty extreme example of how this can be used. Again, this is very much an iterative process. This is probably towards the very end of your journey as opposed to one of the first things you try and take on. But patch management is at the best of times, it's a cumbersome and difficult thing to implement because it's a balancing act between deploying patches and security updates as quickly as possible, while also making sure that your system behaves consistently and still works as expected. To do it right requires a lot of manual work and testing and verification of system operation before and after the patch is applied. So traditionally, this would involve multiple people. You would have maybe your IT operations guy reviewing the patch. Is it security? Is it critical? What components within the system does it impact, and so on and so on and so on. Raising a change request, applying that to production, one or more non-production environments, making sure it works as expected. Then looking for pre-approval of the change into production, gets approved in production, post-approval, and so on and so on. And it can involve multiple people. It can take a long time, carries a lot of risk. With a compliant DevOps and compliant ITIL approach, taking those BDD tests again, the automated tests that are going to drive the quality, the validation of software, we can use compliant DevOps to create a temporary environment based off our production environment. We can apply the patch to that environment, run all of our BDD tests, make sure everything works according to plan. If it doesn't, we know there's an issue. We know there's a problem with this new patch that means we can't apply it, or we can't apply it straight away without further testing, and we stop the process. If all those tests pass, we can then deploy this into test in other non-production servers, make sure it works okay. At that point, without any real human intervention, you've actually got the patch tested all the way up to production, and you can then make a decision, okay, do we go ahead and move this into production or not? So you can greatly simplify the amount of work involved. You can reduce the timeframes involved, while not sacrificing quality or control or change management in any way. That's it. I kind of ran through a bit quicker than I expected, but hopefully that made some sense, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark, so much. Yeah, I don't know if it made loads of sense to me.
Yeah, sorry.
But
Yeah.
actually, I
There's a
think
lot in there. Yeah.
no, it's fantastic, and a lot of real innovative concepts there, Mark. Thank you so much. Actually, there's a couple of very good questions that,
Okay.
which may help. I was thinking myself. So let me see. For example, let's start with this one. It says, will compliant DevOps introduce a lot of overhead to my existing DevOps framework?
No, if you've got an existing DevOps framework, I mean, based on the assumption that you're happy with your DevOps framework, because that's an important thing too. I mean, are you happy to have your DevOps framework, your DevOps process, decide whether or not code is ready for production? Because that's really the key part of DevOps is we're going to test automatically and then deploy to production. So if you're comfortable with the scope of testing that you have, then there isn't much of an overhead here. Really, the overhead is taking the BDD element of it and mapping out scenarios so you can take your requirements and say, this requirement is implemented in these scenarios, which executes these tests. So it's not, again, depending on whether or not you're happy with your DevOps, it's not a big overhead.
Okay.
It's also, yeah, it can be incremental as well. Maybe look at your top 5 or top 6 features or requirements, use those first, make sure they work as expected, and then do other features.
Okay, Mark, thanks. And actually that runs nicely into this other question that came through. So thank you for people who are sending through questions. It seems like a large undertaking to implement compliant ITIL. Where would you recommend starting? Where would you expect to see the quickest wins?
It's one of those that depends on the organization. I can probably put it in the context of Odyssey and talk through some of that maybe, because different organizations have different pain points. They have different kind of recurring tasks that they do. So really the best way to start with this is to look for tasks, a process, procedure, or just a set of tasks that you do quite frequently. Ideally, it's tasks that require multiple stakeholders. So a good example from Odyssey would be onboarding of users, of new staff. When we looked at compliant ITIL earlier, well, late last year, we talked about the fact that we were going through a growth phase. We're taking a lot of new staff, a lot of staff onboarding to be done. So it made sense to target that because it's a process that, it requires finance to set up payroll, requires HR for a number of tasks, IT, and also line management. So we've got multiple stakeholders involved. It's a repeated process that happens quite frequently, and it's a relatively simple process. So that's what you're kind of looking for, something that you do a lot of that's quite straightforward. Mm-hmm. The other aspect of it then is the tools that you need to kind of do that automation. To start off with, there are free tools, usually bundled up in the likes of Office 365, for example. You've got Microsoft Forms and workflows, so you can build online forms very quickly. Okay. You can have them execute workflows in the background and kind of test it out a little bit, kick the tires if you like, see if it works, see if it delivers value, and then use that to try and get buy-in from other areas in the business and see if you can take on another quick win. So really, with compliant ITIL, it's all about trying to find the next quick win as opposed to a big bang implementation. Okay.
So in its very concept, that is actually looking for you being able to pick off the smaller pieces and immediately get quick wins.
Yeah. It's really, like I said, it's different for different businesses or different organizations because there are things that we might do once a quarter, other businesses do 5 times a day. So you can't say, so it's different.
Yeah, makes sense. There is another question, but I might at this stage, Mark, thank you very much. I think it's very insightful and very innovative. So, and makes a lot of sense actually in its overall concept of bringing the best of best practices in IT with the regulations and the compliance and the ability to bring them together and show the evidence of how you're doing best practices. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and there is an awful lot of stuff in there, so it is kind of hard to fit into a few minutes, but okay.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. So at this stage, I think I'll just ask the rest of Fionnán to join us again, and then I'm going to ask Oisín and Amrutha to join, and I'm going to introduce Oisín and Amrutha because I haven't done that previously. So if I could just ask the hi there and ask everyone to turn on their audio and their cameras, and hopefully everybody's able to see them there. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly introduce Mr. Oisin Kern, CEO and co-founder at Odyssey VC. Oisin has been working in life sciences for more than 2 decades. During this time, he has held leading roles in transforming life sciences across multiple business areas, including regulatory and compliance, digital and connected health. Oisin has extensive experience in life science applications, GXP cloud integration, IoT, and healthcare system deployment. So welcome, Oisin. And thanks very much. And Amrutha Prakash, sorry, I hope I said that right. Amrutha has previously worked as a CSV engineer before moving into QA and compliance. This unique experience combination allows Amrutha to support pharmaceutical clients in the building of quality and compliance processes that can answer industry required standards and regulations. With an in-depth knowledge of biotechnology, microbiology, and more, this enables her to efficiently trace processes from R&D to product delivery. So delighted to have you on the panel, Amrutha. Thank you for joining us too. Okay, so I'm going to kick off with the first question that I think came up during Mark's presentation, but I'm going to send it here and out to the panel. With the drive to ensure compliance of cloud technology and cloud activities to industry regulations, do we see a need for the traditionally separate roles of IT and compliance start to merge? So sorry, I don't know if I read that. Do we see a need for the traditionally separate roles of IT and compliance start to merge? Will they start to share responsibilities? How do you see this work? I guess that's a question about whether we see the IT and compliance roles start to merge because of the introduction of cloud technology.
Yeah, I might jump in on that one, Pauline. So, I mean, looking at the topic for today in terms of management systems, I mean, the reason we're actually doing this particular webinar is probably partly a response to that question, is because the traditional split, say, between quality and compliance in terms of ensuring consistent output of a business process or a business and IT, in particular, when you talk about SaaS companies, I'm aware there's a diverse group who are probably joining us today, some from the manufacturer side, some from the SaaS side. But if you're a SaaS company, it's inherently connected. Now you do have that internal function, which Ruth is probably better placed to talk to, but the independence of the quality function internally to make sure that your processes are consistently achieving their desired outcome is important. And that's where you get a slight split in terms of the responsibilities. But I think what Mark is talking about, I mean, we're really excited about it here in terms of bringing that to industry. When you look at actually embedding compliance processes directly into how IT runs its day-to-day business, because with all due respect to our IT colleagues, historically, they like to focus on IT jobs and not the administration of the job, so to speak. So I think Mark is a really great statement. There's anything that you're doing is, you know, automate yourself out of a job is a good way of looking at that, is looking at those processes, looking at those compliance processes to achieve consistent intended outcomes and build those into the day-to-day activities of our IT colleagues. And that way we get much better product. So in my view, if you're a SaaS company, I think it's probably inevitable, if not probably almost mandatory at this stage, is that you embed compliance directly into your day-to-day processes, because otherwise, how do you achieve that desired outcome for your target customers in life sciences? Because they're going to ask you for evidence of this anyway. Yeah. So I think it's a real differentiator, you know.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Oisin. Here's maybe a question I'll maybe send first to Amrutha. Is implementing a QMS and ISMS going to be expensive? Interesting question.
If you have a quality management system already in place, or even if you think you don't have one, I think all companies do have a basic structure. They have processes already in place, even though you might not realize it. Yeah. So depending on which standard you would like to follow based on your services and products, I don't think it's very expensive. It takes time and effort, of course, and you have to also include or integrate a culture of quality into your management system. So that mindset is very important when you implement that in your organization. So it's basically changing that or integrating that culture into your company first, and then working towards a standard based on your service.
So building it in. So it shouldn't be an overhead, it should be built in from the start.
Yes, it's a commitment.
Yeah, actually, And just something I'd like to add on to that, Pauline, because what Amrita is saying is exactly right. When it comes to the cost of it, everybody likes to make sure that they're minimizing the overhead, perceived overhead. But as Amrita said, there's an expectation that what you're producing is governed by a quality system. It's not actually overhead, it's part of doing business. But I think one of the important things that we noticed ourselves, and for all, say, SMEs who might be joining the call, it's very easy to engage a third party and say, please come in and install a QMS for me. That's sometimes a challenge because you know your business and you know your business processes. So albeit it's a bit of a headache, I think putting in place that minimum structure that you know best on what's required to produce the output of your business and your business processes is probably more cost effective than asking or downloading a set of procedures and just installing them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and maybe what you need then is just guidance along the way. But as you say, you know your business best, so it's best for you to start with it.
Exactly, and by all means, like, look for support in terms of structure and drafting and implementation. But your SME knowledge and your business knowledge is pretty important in terms of capturing that in the procedural side of how you run the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Oisín. Another question, what is the best way to train stakeholders to understand the QMS that manages cloud activities?
Is this to me? Yeah, can I take it?
Okay, of course you can take it, Amrita. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So as I said, again, it's about focusing on what your requirements are based on your company's needs. So as long as you document and practice what you actually do and not what you should do. Mm-hmm. So if you state that this is something I should do, but don't follow it, that might be a problem in future. So it's important that you always have the management system in line with what your needs are as a company. So none of the standards or regulatory requirements says this is how you should do it. It's completely dependent on what your company's needs are. And also, another thing I would like to suggest is when you're implementing a management system, always integrate the idea of thinking of how it's going to have a consequence or how it's going to impact a system or the quality of what you deliver to your customers. So if somebody is trained on a procedure, it's very good, but they should also know what happens if they don't follow that procedure.
Okay.
How does that impact? That's also very important.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point you've made, actually, Rita, because that's one way also to remember how to do it well rather than the wrong way. If you really understand by not doing it the correct way what the impact is, it'll remind you to follow us. Yeah. Thank you, Amrita.
Problem.
Another question here. In your experience, have industry regulators assessed QMS and ISMS agreements that govern cloud activities? But maybe Fionnán or somebody in.
Okay, yes, we have direct connection with that.
Okay.
They did look at the agreements. They did look at the architectures as well, and what was the data flow and what was the overall architecture of that cloud relationship. And they asked questions about how much. What they did dig into was how much the user knew about the architecture and the relationship it had with the vendor. And very often, and sometimes, they find out that the user doesn't fully understand the relationship, doesn't understand the architecture and where the data might be going and all that. And that's because they weren't involved in the quality agreements or the terms and conditions that were provided by the thing. So they're not fully aware. And I know this is one of the things I discussed with Oisín, and it's a new concept within data integrity now, is this thing of a data owner. And that's one of the things that they didn't display, was that somebody needs to own data from the minute it's created to the minute the time it's destroyed. And that was not fully understood and not properly called out in the agreement, but absolutely for sure, they have looked to see service level agreements, quality agreements, and checking if the regulated customer understands the full relationship and how it impacts them and where their data is going, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we have seen that.
Okay. Okay, so it's good to understand them, have them at hand, and it's very much something that they would look for. It's good to know. Thanks, Fionnán. I think we have time for maybe one more question and have a look at that, or maybe getting to the end of the questions that come through. So it looks like a long one, so I'll see if I read it out properly. So excuse me. The implementation of compliant DevOps and compliant ITIL to ensure software and service quality for cloud applications seems a very new concept. One, is it? And two, do you think auditors, the regulatory bodies and industry are ready to accept or approve it? Maybe.
I can probably take the first
Yeah.
part anyway. It's more a new use case for existing approaches. So we're kind of using ITIL, which has been around for decades, and DevOps, which has been around for quite a few years, in a different environment and adding to it. But the core value of those things is already well proven. You know, we can see the value of DevOps. We can see the impact it has. There are a growing number of companies who never manually test any part of their code base, but still manage to run quality, in a general sense, quality software solutions. On the auditor piece, I think anyone else in the panel can probably answer this better than me, but I think really it's probably the move from CSV to CSA is probably aligned with this. It's a different kind of approach, and but I think it's I think you need to prove the value of the work that you're doing in that sense. I think that's why BDD is an important part of it too, because you can sort of see that link between the user requirements and the executed tests, if you like.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I think just on that second part, probably just follow on from where Mark is going with it. Those concepts, I think this was at the root of what we were saying here, is you take best practices that we know produce good software, that produce good products. But what we're talking about here is integrating the expectations from a compliance perspective into those processes. So what does not work, and we know that this happens in audits all the time, that if you have an FTA auditor and you come in, you know, they're asking for evidence, and you say, oh, well, we've got an ISO cert, that doesn't wash. It's an evidence-based business. So what I don't think here is going to work is, here's my DevOps process. It's up to you, auditor, to figure out how that fits with the regulations. I think the key here is translating the evidence that's automatically produced as part of these standardized processes and translating them into the structure that is familiar based on the regulatory frameworks. And this is where, as Mark said, there's a lot of work to do on this, but at Odyssey, this is what we're helping SaaS companies do now is, you know, Mark spoke in detail there about BDD. Here we can translate those into user requirements. So if somebody says, let me see your user requirements document, here it is. Let me see your test evidence against those user requirements. It comes from a different part of the flow. Show me the qualification of your infrastructure. Here's the evidence that's provided from the tooling that we're using. So I think an auditor won't accept, yes, we have compliant DevOps, no more questions. They want to see the evidence that's produced from that. And I think that's the key, I think, opportunity in the industry here, is to actually translate that now and leverage those best practices that have been around for a while.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I think that's the end actually of our questions that have been put through. So I suppose I'm going to wrap on the panel discussion and thank everybody for joining it. So thank you to Mark and Marutha, Fionnán and Oisín. You know, great insight there and great answers to the questions. Not necessarily an easy topic, so I think you answered them very well, and some complicated questions in there. So thanks so much. So I think that's getting close to the close of our webinar session today. I would like to just thank everybody for attending this session. I'd like all the contributors to the session. Thank you very much. We'll share the poll results that we ran during the session on our social media, so please look out for those. And finally, just to say, you know, we are running this as a series, so part 3 of the series will be taking place on Tuesday, the 27th of September, and we'll discuss at that point, we'll be discussing selecting fit for purpose cloud solutions and avoiding the pitfalls. So I'd just like to welcome everybody back to that session and look out for that. So thank you to all once again, and we'll close our webinar session for today. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.